already said, my name's Britta. For those who don't know me yet, I'm based in Bielefeld. Yes, I know the town that doesn't exist, so okay, I got that, near the Teutoburger Forest. And when I don't have the pleasure of working with Aslam and doing webinars, I'm part of a team running an English Communication Skills Institute, which is where I'm a team leader, and which is why I suppose Cornelius invited me today to do this workshop, which I'm super pleased to do because we've picked a really exciting topic, which is the fine art of mediation. Mediation is one of my absolute pet projects. So let's see what this is going to be like for us together. I'd like some best practice exchange via the chat if possible. The more the merrier. So if you feel like you want to add something, put comments into the chat, feel free to do so. I'd be happy to comment on those. Even if I can't mention your names, we'll make sure everything gets read. So the fine art of mediation and English communication skills training. What is this whole thing about? So let's see. I've prepared an agenda for today, obviously, and I thought we could start with mediation itself. What on earth is this thing called mediation? Then we could have a look at linguistic mediation and mediation strategies together. Then dive into some practical classroom activities because, as most of you, I suppose, I'm a teacher. So what I usually do is when I don't do workshops, I do teacher trainer workshops. I teach classes and incorporate training. And yeah, I do basically what you do, I suppose. So I was, of course, very interested in finding out how can I use mediation in practical classroom activities, and how can mediation maybe also help all the self-employed teachers as part of their business schedule, part of their business portfolio. And finally, we'll have a look at how we can evaluate mediation skills with the help of the descriptors mentioned in the companion volume of the European Framework of Reference. So that's the overall agenda that I thought would be useful for us to have today. But as I said, feel free to comment in the chat if there is anything you'd like to add or to discuss. So without further ado, let's dive into the question of what on earth is mediation. So before I tell you what I think mediation is, I'd be super curious to learn from you what you already know about mediation. So what does that word trigger? What do you think of when you hear the word mediation? Could you give me a few ideas in the chat? That would be nice. Simply type whatever comes to your mind. What is mediation? Aha, imparting or communicating meaning. Wow. Somebody knows it from exams. Students have to solve bilingual communication situations. Okay. Sprachliche Communication. It's a nice mix. Discussing together to come to a common conclusion. Super. I like that. Do you also touch on mediation assignments and test papers at upper level? No, I'm afraid we won't in this webinar. But it's good you're mentioning it because it's good to know that there is an interest in that. A lot more than translation. Super. Yes, definitely. Summarize in your own words a text including intercultural aspects. Wow. I tell another person what I read or heard. Yes, very nice. So it obviously seems that most of you already use mediation strategies or activities in your training, which is super. So then I'd hope that you'll let me know whether what I do is really useful. So I rely on your feedback. In my own words from my mother language. That's an interesting point that somebody's just added to the chat. Yes. So convey information or meaning in my own words in my mother language. Yes. And somebody wrote there, I only know it in a legal context. That's an interesting thing you wrote there in the chat, because I have to admit, before I started diving in the topic of mediation, I thought it was something like this, to be honest. So I thought that mediation was something, that helped me or two guys in a fight about something to come back to a peaceful relationship. So that was what I knew mediation from a business setting, mediating between two parties that for some reason are at loggerheads with each other, that sort of thing. That was what I thought mediation was. Until I found out together, or by reading the companion volume of the European Framework of Reference, that there is a lot more to it, which I could also use in English communication skills training. And a lot of that is what you've mentioned in the chat. So let's have a look at how we can use that and how we can turn it into practical exercises, or where we can already find it hidden in exercises. So let's see. The actual idea behind mediation is that there are different ideas and concepts that you can mediate. It's not just language, as somebody just said, it's much more than translation. It means, for example, that you inform somebody about something that that person has no access to. You mediate information. Easy example, somebody's read something about touristy information on the internet that another person has not read about, and that person will then pass on that information to the person who has not had access to that bit of information. This could be in a plurilingual setting. One person speaks English, the other speaks German, the third speaks Russian, the fourth speaks Kazakh, whatever language might come up, and we'll pass on that information. We mediate that information to the next person. So here we are just on an information level. Concert starts at 8 o'clock, bus leaves at 10:30. We mediate information. However, we can mediate more. We can mediate in a communication process to help people understand each other. And this is where it turns really interesting, because why is that so important? Because help people understanding each other is like building bridges. And that's what I'd like to think of when I hear the word mediation. It's like building bridges. It helps people to understand each other on a language, on a linguistic basis, on a linguistic level, but also on a level that is related to culture or cross-cultural information, as some of you already mentioned in the chat. So it's more than just information and more than just translation. And finally, what else does it do? It helps to share ideas to reach a solution. Now, that sounds like a big thing, share ideas to reach a solution. But in the end, if I read this touristy information on the internet, pass it on to somebody else, and then we need to find out how best to get there or who we should invite to go with us, that is also sharing an idea to reach a solution. So these three aspects, let's put them into pictures because they're easier to memorize, I guess. So these three aspects, so information, mediating information, mediating ideas, and sharing and collaborating to reach a solution, to come to an understanding. Those three I would for now consider the main aspects of mediation for our purposes today. So information, ideas, and collaboration to come to a solution, as someone already wrote in a chat. I think that person wrote a conclusion. Very nice aspect. So now you might say, oh my gosh, well, this sounds like a C1 level or a B1 level or B2 level, but can we do that at a lower level? How is this relevant at all in my group of 4 students learning English to go to Rome, for example? I'd argue this is a very important concept or idea because it reflects that we now use English, as we've so often said in many webinars, as a lingua franca, as a tool, as a means of communication with which we are enabled to communicate with people from other culture, other settings, other understandings of the world around them. And this is why I would argue, and this is why I think it's so fascinating, that mediation should be included in any English communication skills training, even from a lower level on. And by lower level, I really mean A1, A2 level. So let's see, how can this be done? Linguistic mediation and mediation strategies. What does that mean? How can we put that into practice? And what does that mean with regard to the language that we teach and that we use? So when we talk about language, we talk about language production, right? So when I want to mediate easy to receive information, the concert starts at 3 o'clock, then I produce language. The concert starts at 3 o'clock. Okay. Obviously, there is also somebody at the other end of the line, and that is the person that receives this information, so reception. So that person might either understand, not understand, or misunderstand the information that I pass on. I might have said, instead of the concert starts at 11 o'clock, I might have said the event is to commence at 11 a.m., for example, which might lead to misunderstandings or might not be understood because of the language I use. So production seems to be easy at the end of the person who produces, but we also need to bear in mind, oh my gosh, there is the receptionist at the other end of the line, of the communication line. And that person might or might not understand what we are saying for various reasons. And this is where mediation sets in. Okay, so we have production, we have reception, and then comes something called interaction. And here's where the interesting thing starts. If you like information about how to interact in an international setting, I'd really advise you to watch the TED Talk by Heather Hansen, How to Speak Bad English Perfectly. One of the most charming and most entertaining talks on English communication skills and how to teach English. So this is definitely where she would put a smile on your face saying the interaction is the thing where things get difficult. Interaction meaning the interaction between two or more people in, as the European Framework of Reference says, in a pluricultural and plurilinguistic setting, meaning people come from different cultures, people have different mother tongues that they rely on, different second or third languages that they have learned. And with those languages, they learned culture, they learn beliefs, they learn understanding. They might mix those, they might like some more than others. All this plays a role in interaction and in the process of mediating information, ideas, or collaboration to come to an understanding. The title of the TED Talk again is Heather Hansen, How to Speak Bad English Perfectly. Such a charming title. How to Speak Bad English Perfectly. Something I also sometimes share with my students because it puts a smile on their face and they won't find the word so hard anymore. So how to speak bad English perfectly. Okay, so here we have it. We have mediation strategies and focuses, ideas, information, collaboration. And we have the three linguistic points, the three language points that we need to bear in mind when fostering or supporting mediation production, reception, and interaction. Good. So far, so good. So that's the theory. Now, let's see, how can this be useful for us as teachers? What kind of strategies or activities evolve from this? For example, as the European Framework of Reference or the companion volume partially says, and this is only an excerpt of what is available there. So this is what I'd like to focus on for now, because personally, I find that most useful. Explaining information. Many of you said in the chat, mediation means to pass on information or to tell somebody else what I've heard, what I understood, what I've read. Explaining information or relaying information. Adapting language, super important point. Breaking down complicated information. Expressing a personal response. I'd like for now to give you an example for adapting language. We had to learn it the hard way, I'm afraid. We, as an institute, had an order was placed with us to do communication skills training, focusing on telephoning language with a Danish company. The Danish company was in contact with a Polish and a German company, and they felt that some improvement could be made on the Danish and on the German side. So we were invited to do some communication skills training on the German side, which we did. So we did all the things that one is supposed to do when doing communication skills training. So we taught them all the right phrases to answer when dealing with a problem on the phone, when answering the phone, when having to postpone or something, or when having to talk about delays, that sort of thing. And it all went very well and people learned diligently. 3 weeks later, we phoned and said, so how did it go? So what's the real life experience? And the answer was, well, yeah, it works okay. But the Danish guy said, can't we do it like before? We sort of understood the German guys better before the training, which was a bit of a downer, to be honest. So that set us wondering what on earth had happened. We had told them all the right stuff, we thought, all the right phrases, all the right language. What we had not thought about was that, of course, language needed to be adapted, to be understood, to be used, to be taken on board by the recipient at the other end of the line. We had not asked the Danish colleagues, is that the kind of language that you can deal with? We had not done any supervision, to be honest. So we learned it the hard way, and the training was considered less efficient as it could have been had we thought about this mediation activity, had we thought about the fact that students also need to learn to adapt their language to be understood at the other end of the line. Breaking down complicated information and expressing a personal response is something that what I would consider very important in the mediation strategy and activities. And finally, and here comes the so-called, if you'd like to call it that, the Royal League, so to say, or the fine art of mediation, facilitating collaborative interaction and collaborating to construct meaning. Okay, this is the theory. So this is what the companion volume and what people far clever than me have told me in their literature. This is what mediation partially consists of. Now, how can we turn that into practical exercises, into tasks for our students, especially at a lower level? So let's dive into a few practical classroom activities. If you read the invitation to the webinar, you've probably come across this. Karl, Susan, and Rio talking to each other. Karl saying, "This was a fantastic webinar, don't you think?" Susan, "I couldn't agree more." Rio, "Why not?" So what went wrong there, and what would you do now to help your students understand? Could you give me a few hints in the chat? What would be your tactics? What would you do? So I'm looking at the chat now, waiting for answers. What would you do to make your students understand what the issue is here? Problem is with Susan said. Okay, so not what Rio said. Yeah. Right, colloquial language. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Taking idiom at a literal meaning, exactly. Rio was obviously taking this at face value. I couldn't agree more. Why not? Why can't you agree more? Couldn't you always agree more than 100%? Try to explain, try to explain the expression. Yes, couldn't agree more. Yes. Very nice. Thanks you so much for sharing this. Second answer doesn't seem to fit. Yeah, indeed. Yes. Give some examples when to use the phrase. Okay. So here we are, as you were very rightly saying in the chat, here we're in the middle, so to say, of a mediation situation. We have a situation where the English language itself is used correctly on all levels. So also the question back, why not, is of course grammatically correct. And still we're having a small communication hiccup, so to say. Practice using question tags is what one person is saying. Very nice. I couldn't agree more, of course, is an idiom that the other speaker, Rio, did not know or took at face value. So we could mediate, and Susan might say something like, answering Rio's question, why not? Oh, what I meant was, I totally agree. Or I totally agree with what Karl said, or something like this. So she could try to adapt her language. That was one of the mediation strategies that we listed before. She could try to adapt her language. She could, of course, also try to use another idiom and hope that he will understand that. Or she could relay that to Karl and ask Karl to explain what she was saying to Rio. So there are various interactive activities that might evolve from this very short interaction between those three people. and how we can use this in simple exercises at a lower level, I'd like to show you, I'd like to share with you. So we said before, these are the mediation activities in practice. These are the strategies: explaining, relaying, adapting, breaking down complicated information, expressing a personal response. So I like, I don't like. And the Royal League, facilitating collaborative interaction and constructing meaning. To prove my point that I think mediation is not something that should only be used or taught, or yeah, let's say used. I prefer the word used to taught in this case. It should be used at higher levels, at a B2 or C1 level. I would say, I would argue that this is something that is very useful also for lower level learners, and we do not necessarily need complicated mediating language to mediate. What we need is a certain mindset and a certain strategy within the classroom to foster mediation and collaboration among students, moving away from teacher-focused learning. Teacher-focused learning can work almost without mediation. Teacher-focused learning can mean you do a task, I tell you whether it's right or wrong, you do the task again, I give you feedback, that's it. You do a task together with another student, I give both of you feedback, you tell me whether the feedback was valuable, right or wrong, case done, case solved, so to say. Mediation, however, moves away from this teacher-focused kind of learning or learning process. I'm not necessarily saying that the other process is completely wrong or that there is something wrong with it as the core. But I would argue that even at a lower level, fostering collaboration on a language level and on the learning level is something that cannot be not useful to students. And I'll show you what I mean by this in a few exercises. So I'm basing this on Easy English Upgrade, on the book A1-2, so the second book of the A1 series, so a really, really low-level series, low progression. And what I mean is something like this. So let's go through point by point, relaying information. So to pass on information to somebody else. And somebody's just wrote in the chat, somebody has to be open and ready to mediate. And this is such a good point. Why is this a good point? Because I think that these mindset, this ability to be open, to be willing to mediate, to pass on information, to explain opinions, is something that needs to be created as atmosphere or as climate within a group. It needs also to come from the teacher, to move away from as I said before, teacher-focused teaching or right and wrong teaching. In the European Framework of Reference, we have the very nice phrase pragmatic correctness, which I've lovely, pragmatic correctness. And this is what definitely helps when we start practicing mediation skills at a lower level. So let's have a look at this one, relaying information. Very simple exercise here. Amy asks her grandmother Charlotte some questions, listen and complete the information. So typical right and wrong, comprehension, task, nothing wrong with that. Now, how can we tweak this a little bit to make this a mediation, I wouldn't say focus, but a mediation task, fostering a little bit the skills of mediation? We could simply ask the student, once they found out the answers to the information about Charlotte Ramsay, to pass this information on to a neighbor, for example. A simple partner exercise. Mediation does not necessarily have to be something that is a big thing where somebody passes on a complicated article about the economic development of so-and-so from that and that economic magazine. It can be a simple task that practices, I've received information, I try to pass it on to a neighbor here, to another group member in class. So a very simple exercise that actually is already mediation. And we can do that without having learned indirect speech or something like this. We can simply coax students into asking, so where does Charlotte Ramsay come from? Tell me about Charlotte Ramsay. Charlotte Ramsay was born in so-and-so. She comes from London. She moved to Bristol when she was, and so on and so forth. It's passing on information at a simple level. And if you want to spread up a notch, then you simply say, close your books and try to repeat from memory, to pass on information that is no longer in front of your eyes, so to say. So that's a simple mediation task at a very low level, is relaying information. What else can we do? Let's get to more complicated texts. We're still in the same book, A1 level. This is a text about Santa Fe. It's an excerpt of the Facts and Fun section. The section has a translation in the Page Player app, so students can always get the translation into German if they feel safer with that, and they can listen to the audio and read along should they want to do that. Now, how can a basically text-based exercise be turned into a mediation exercise? One of the core activities in mediation is breaking down complicated information into easier chunks, adapting your language in order to relay or pass on or explain information. Now here we have a text that, as the vocab assistant shows on the left-hand side, is slightly above the level, the language level of this, that the students have right there and then. Why is that so? In order to reflect what a realistic text, the touristy text would look like, the text that they might be confronted with in the real world. So they have this text there, and now we ask them to not only understand or answer questions, all these are also extra exercises provided in the book, but a mediation task would be to ask students to make a list of the facts, for example, mentioned in the text, decide which facts they find most important, so emotional response, and then invite them to explain what they've read in their own words. So adapt their language for the others to understand. Now you might say, well, isn't this a kind of summary only? Can I not just, ask them to sit down for 2 minutes and write a summary of the text? I would argue no, because a summary just means I'm checking on whether they've understood, and they list the facts that they have there, and that's it. An activity that asks them to relay or pass on information based on their own lists means they've processed the language and they need to adapt it in view of who's listening to them. Who am I relaying this information to? Is my neighbor who sits next to me in class, is she better at English? So can I use all these complicated words in the vocab assistant? Or has she maybe missed the past 3 sessions and therefore I'd rather make it, a little easier for her? So we can try and coax them into mediating within the learners group, which is a really fantastic thing to do, I think, because it takes care of the others as co-learners. And it teaches them, even at a low level, to consider the language that they use, to get a feel for which words are good for me, which are easy for me, which can I make easier, for which do I already know synonyms, or which would I rather not learn for right now because I will probably not need them. So you can turn a simple text, into a mediating task by just asking them to process the text and to relay or pass it on. Or draw them. That is something that's just come up in the chat. To draw a few things, of course, yes. You can also use drawings on the flip chart, for example, or any other means available, and then make them talk about what they see here to process information and relay information. Nice idea. Didn't think about that. Thank you. What other things can you do? Which other things are actually mediating without us properly having thought about the fact that it is mediating? So relaying information and expressing a personal response, very important. What is communication without personal response, without the other end of the line, of the communication line, saying yes or no or perhaps? We need personal response for communication to work. So here we have an exercise, and there you will see, without us having to do anything, mediation is already sneaking into the instruction of these tasks. We have a roundup here. A roundup in this book is basically something like a wrap-up, something like a revision of what was practiced during the unit. So we have here practice with a partner exercise. They are invited to ask each other questions about their last holidays, and people are to take note on the answers. And we are given prompts to practice the simple past in this case. So we also have a grammar point here. So far, so good. So this is a simple partner exercise, no problem there. But then we're moving into a new realm, so to say. Then it says, now work with a new partner. Tell each other about what the first partner's holiday was like. Okay, and here we are getting into the area of mediation. Here I'm passing on information that I've heard, that I've maybe taken notes on. I was lucky enough to scribble them down quickly enough. And I pass on whatever I found most interesting in what the other person said. So I'm filtering the information while passing it on. And the other person is invited to give feedback. Because if, for example, the answer says, Britta enjoyed her holiday, I didn't pick it because the name Britta's in there. I've just noticed that. I'm sorry about that. Seems very self-centered. So Britta enjoyed her holiday. She was away for 2 weeks. She was in Sweden. Actually, I wasn't, but I love Sweden. It's beautiful, beautiful place, right? So positive response. So we have 3 things, so to say, in this task. We have the construction of meaning in the first part of the exercise, practicing grammar at the same time. So kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to say. And then we have a kind of mediation exercise where we are invited to pass on information to a new partner. And again, we will probably have to adapt our language to do that, or students will have to adapt their language to do that. So simple exercise at an A1 level that already fosters communication, collaboration among students. Okay, so hopping on to mediation in practice. We had explaining, relaying, adapting my language, breaking down complicated information, like in the text about Santa Fe, expressing personal response. I like it, I didn't like it, it was great, it was wonderful, so on. And now we come to the really most wonderful thing in mediation, and that is facilitating collaborative interaction or collaborating to construct meaning. Oh my gosh, this is big terms. So what does that mean in practice? Facilitating collaborative interaction. Let's see. So here we have a task called Now You. The Now You tasks are always the one that lead over to more student-focused practice after a new material has been introduced. And it says here, practice with a partner, ask and answer the questions, make some notes, tell the partner about your partner. Okay, now you might say, wait a moment, wasn't that exactly what you told us they did before? So how is that new? The new thing in this is that, first of all, they're given prompts which are incomplete. So we have what you had for practice today. So they obviously need to make up the sentences based on the prompts. And then there is this one word in there in this instruction that makes it really interesting. And that's the word practice. Practice with a partner. Why is practice different from make up questions and answer them together with a partner? Practice makes it different because practice refers to the learning process. And here we can use mediation, adapting language, passing on information. We can use these mediation strategies to practice learning together, interaction, exactly as somebody just wrote in the chat. Very right. We can use these strategies to practice together. So here it is not just about getting the sentences right. It is also about feedback on what your partner said. So if my partner says, what you had for breakfast today, or where you went your last holiday, then in a teacher focus session, I would say, wait a moment. Remember, there was this thing with did, and then they would probably, I would spoon feed them the answer a little bit, and then they would either come up with the idea themselves where the problem was, or they would just parrot me and I would give them the answer. Not when you try to get mediation strategies into the learning process. So I would now leave the learning process in the hands of my students. I would walk around in this scenario, look at the pairs, and would check who's finding the answers out themselves in English. How do they mediate this information or relay this information that the first answer, for example, what have you for breakfast today, is wrong? Can somebody explain that in English? Can Can they come up with their own rules, maybe, that they set up? So I would leave the learning process for a much longer while in their hands than I would if I were more on the in a more teacher-focused mode, so to say, giving them the answers, spoon-feeding them, and they come up with the answers, and that's it. So mediation here does not only mean coming up with the right sentences. I'm not just mediating linguistically. I'm fostering mediation in the learning process. And this is a really fascinating thing to do also at an A1 level. It gives students the chance, for example, to discuss rules in their own language, something that somebody mentioned in the chat before. So if you have guys from Poland, from Germany, from Italy, from Greece, from wherever, from all over the world in your classes, then you will probably find that mediating rules in a language that is my own is often a lot easier than having to do it in English or in German or any other foreign language that I try to learn in the first place. So helping each other, both sides, as you very nicely say in the chat, both sides working, collaborating with each other, mediating and relaying information. That's part of the learning process, doing it together, doing it in class. And this can be done in big groups and in a one-on-one or in pair work. Okay, so here we have an easy example for facilitating collaborative interaction. So watch out for the word practice, one of the keywords that might help you coming up with mediation exercises. Okay, but there is more than that. Collaborating to construct meaning. I remember in one of the former webinars, somebody wrote so very, very nicely in the chat, language communication skills training is about creating meaningful interaction. I think that person wrote, which is such a nice phrase to memorize, meaningful interaction. And that's, I think, exactly what is meant by collaborating to construct meaning. Now, meaning from a language teacher's point of view is, of course, also something that you can look up in the dictionary, right? Meaning of the hotel is, well, that's not a good example, is hotel, but meaning of staff is, if you look it up in the German dictionary, Personalbelegschaft or that sort of thing. So we can easily construct meaning by checking it out in the dictionary. Maybe not now, not like this today, but like this. However, there is a second level to this word meaning. And this level encompasses everything that comes with this word: cultural background, emotional background, my personal learning experience with that word, the meaning that is within and around the whole atmosphere or the situation I find myself using the language in. Abstract meaning, for example, as we can read in the chat. Absolutely, yes. So meaning does not just mean translation. It's a lot more than translation, as you wrote in the chat before. Here we have an exercise that focuses on words. So it is a consolidation exercise of Unit 10 of this book, so relatively late in the book. So we've almost reached the end of the A1.2 level. So you can see now the book's trying to get mediation tactics on board, a lot more than in the early stages of the book. So what are students asked to do? Read and listen to the reviews and find out the meaning of the words from their context. So can you understand the words in red by reading the text globally, so to say, global reading, one of the phrases used in such situations. So we are asked to find out, or the students are asked to find out what might bathroom mean, dirty, shower didn't work, recommend, staff, and view. Some of these words you might say, well, that's really easy because a bathroom is a bathroom. So it is a room with a shower or with a basin or with water in it or whatever. So that's relatively easy to find out. But sentences like the shower didn't work, the water was cold, for example, carries a lot of extra meaning with it. So if you ask a student, what does it mean to you? What does it mean the shower didn't work? Some student might say, oh yeah, didn't work, no water. Some might say, oh yeah, it's dripping, right? Drip, drip, drip the whole night through. Others might say, oh, the water was cold. Others might say, oh, there was not enough water, only a trickle of water, so not enough water. So you suddenly find that there is meaning for the word didn't work that comes from students' experience, obviously, from their knowledge, from pre-existing knowledge that they might want to bring on board. So didn't work is much more than hat nicht funktioniert as a translation into German. And when we ask students to find out meaning without looking up the meaning in the dictionary, that comes as a second step, then we can integrate mediation strategies. We can ask students to talk about what they think these words mean in the text. Tell each other or talk to each other about what you think the words might mean. The same goes for friendly staff. Well, here we are asked to find out what is staff. So they come up with people or employees, if they know that word, or people working who work there, that sort of thing. But we can also try and ask them to mediate what is friendly. Tell your partner what is friendly. Some might say, well, when they smile. Others might say when I get an upgrade. So it depends on what you consider friendly. So we can get adapting language and explaining language into an easy exercise like this above the level or in a second level to translation. In a simple exercise like this, and take the translation level as a second one, so to say. Before looking up the words, dive into this, voyage into the language and their experience that they can bring on board. And now comes my absolute pet part of this book, the cartoons. I love teaching with cartoons anyway, so I was very glad to see that the teams included cartoons. And so my question to you would be, with all this in mind that we've discussed so far, what would you do with a cartoon like this? What instructions would you give your students? How would you integrate it? What would you do with it? So I'm excited to read what you'll come up with. This. Right. Ask students to explain what they think is happening. Okay. What other men? Make up a dialogue. Very nice. Small groups, explain it. Okay. So explain, the groups explain it to each other, right? Or within their groups. Explain what's happening. Yes. Thank you. Oh, role play. Nice idea. One is the Uber driver and one is the taxi driver. Really nice. Cool idea. Yes. Anything else you'd like to add? Yes, I can see someone still typing. So what wonderful ideas. Very nice. Mind the context of the economic dispute involved. There we go. So breaking down complicated language. Yes, you are absolutely right. Of course, that's in the background, the economic dispute, right, between the taxi driver and the Uber driver. Absolutely. Yes. Predicting what will happen, right? If we have already introduced the future, yes. What do you think will happen? Yes. At first just describe the picture. Okay. So all of these are really super for mediation purposes. And I can see there's more coming. Drawing a second picture. Yes, absolutely. If you knew my drawing expertise, you probably wouldn't want to, but yes, absolutely. Yes. Great idea. Yes, imagine what had been before, what happened before, right? Yes, speech bubbles. What a nice idea to draw speech bubbles. Yes. So maybe not show them the actual text that comes with the cartoon, but blotch that for the beginning and ask them to come up with speech bubbles. Really nice idea. Thank you. Okay. So what can one do with that, bearing in mind that we want to integrate mediation activities or strategies into this task? So obviously, talking about pictures is always a wonderful thing for mediation, because with pictures, we have to relay information in words because the words are not given, right? We only have a picture. The same goes for signs in towns, for signages at the entrances of companies, where I have to relay information to somebody to what's supposed to happen or not to happen. So pictures in general, icons, whatever, are a wonderful thing to practice mediation strategies. So what you could do is, of course, you could ask and start with a simple thing. Like someone in the chat just mentioned, ask them what they see in the picture. So what can you see? That's mediation at a really simple level. We started saying mediation is also passing on information that somebody else has no access to. So we could ask half of the group to keep the books closed and ask the other half, pass on the information. What is in the picture? What can you see? So they will have to relay information, adapt the language so that the others understand, and pass on this information to the others. So there are two cars. One car is a taxi. The other car is an Uber car. There are two men, and so on and so forth. So even at a simple level, that could be done. More difficult level, what is the cartoon about? So now we are diving into maybe even the economic dispute that was mentioned in the chat before. So what is this cartoon about? It's about an Uber car and a taxi driver. Okay. So we might then, if the books are still closed, right, we might come with words with like they talk to each other, they're talking to each other, they're friendly, they're having a fight, they're discussing something. So what is it about? What is there that is more than can be seen, so to say? And then we're getting to the personal response level. Do you think this is funny? I don't know. Somebody who maybe has a taxi driver in their family may not think that's funny. Somebody who loves using Uber and finds this the most, the easiest and most wonderful thing to have when traveling might think, yes, this is very funny. Yes, I love that. Nice cartoon. You could ask for a more personal response. Did you use an Uber car in the last 3 months? Why or why not? So here we are coming to moving into the area of opinion. So we can discuss this in class, or you could pass on this information to a neighbor. And then finally, relaying information, explaining information, tell the group about your team's ideas. So is it good to have an Uber car? Yes or no? So even if we only had access to grammar like simple present and simple past, I like, I dislike, I don't like, even then, mediation works. Mediation is not a skill that is only useful for B2 or C1 levels. It is not something that is only useful for people who need to explain or relay information at university when passing on something that they've read about the economic development in Denmark, for example. No, it is something that we do on an everyday basis. It is something that we need to do when we meet a stranger in a supermarket and we are asked, where can I find bleacher? It is something that we need to do if we see somebody standing with a map in hand in town and they don't know where to go and we want to ask and we want to relay information and we need to adapt our language for the other person to understand. And this is the beauty of mediation. It can change people's mindset. It can open up people towards the idea that I need to adapt to be able to communicate. And this goes far above the level of correctness. So this is why I think mediation should absolutely be a factor in English communication skills training at any level, no matter whether it's A1 or A2 or B1 or a C1 level. It can be started with this idea in mind that it builds bridges and that it enables people to adapt their language, to think about what language they use to be able to create meaning together. And this is the most wonderful thing about mediation. So, having said that, should we still evaluate mediation skills? Oh, this sounds so nice, change in mindset, and we all want to mediate. We want to build bridges between people. And now there we go. At the end of a class or of a course, there comes the HR department or there come the students themselves and says, are we going to do a test? So can we test mediation skills? Can we do that? Can we find out how well somebody is able to adapt their language to be understood at the other end of the communication line? The European Framework of Reference, the companion volumes, says, well, what we can do is we can use can-do statements. And I think it is very important to understand the descriptors in the CFR and in the companion volumes are never meant, or were, the way I've understood it, were never meant to be test criteria. It's not a thing that you can adapt and say, well, if you can't do that, you're not an A1 level. If you can't do that, if you can't give personal response, you are not an A1 level. What it means is it can entice students or coax students into finding out what they can or cannot do, what they're able or are not able to do at a certain point within your class. These are the descriptors, the overall mediation descriptors of the CFR of 2020. You can find out more from following page 92. So I tend to use those, for example, with my classes. Only in my case, it was a B1 class, but you'll find similar descriptors for all levels. So if you're interested, hand them out to their students and ask them for their experience. If they can't deal with the language that is used in the descriptors, you need, of course, to provide an easier version. You need to mediate and come up and adapt the language so they can understand. The interesting thing about you doing it and they doing it, or them doing it, is that you may find out that there might be a difference in evaluation, in the outcome of the evaluation. So I always find it very interesting to hand out this this evaluation sheet, this can-do statement sheet to my students, and to do evaluation myself, and then to find out when we differ enormously, when somebody says, yes, I'm absolutely sure I can, recognize when difficulties occur, and I can indicate that in language the nature of the problem, and I feel, ooh, really? I'm not so sure about that. Then it often comes down to specific situations, and situations in which the student imagines he needs these mediation skills. And if my understanding of mediation is different from their understanding, we might have to reconsider the can do. It's maybe his can do, but not my can do. So if you use this, bear in mind, these are no testing criteria. These are self-evaluation criteria. These are descriptors, and they're very useful as such. So this is all from my end. So I hope I've been able to convince you that mediation skills are one of the most wonderful things to teach and to use from whatever level you teach. Thank you very much.
Cornelsen. Potenziale entfalten.